Hi everyone, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Brittany of BrittanyJJones.com. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome to the channel. I hope that you will like what you see and subscribe below for more. In today's video, we are going to be sewing along to Vogue 2064. We're going to be following along with View A in this video. For fabric, I'm using a rayon jersey. The fabric is lightweight and has a lot of drape, which is perfect for this dress. For sizing, I cut the size 20 around the bust, the 22 around the waist, and the 24 around the hips. Before we get started, I do want to point out a few things. I am using a straight stitch to construct this dress for majority of my seams, but that's just what I'm doing. You can absolutely use your serger if you prefer to do that, to sew up all your seams, and then you will have to do your top stitching. Or if you'd like, you can use a zigzag stitch if you want to do that. There's also some helpful tips in the instructions for sewing with knit fabrics if this is your first time sewing with the knit. But I just wanted to point that out in case you see me doing a straight stitch on knit fabric. I am doing it for majority of my stitches, and I tend to do straight stitches on knit fabrics on my vertical seams, and then on maybe my horizontal seams I'll use a twin needle or I use a zigzag stitch. That's all just personal preference. You can test out what works best for the fabric that you are using and then just go with that. The next thing that I want to mention is a zipper. I am using an ivory color zipper for this tutorial just so it'll be easier for you all to see. My zipper is also a little bit shorter than what's recommended, so if your zipper is longer, I'll link a video down below that can help you shorten a zipper if you've never done that before. And also if you just need to know how to install an invisible zipper, I'll have a video link for you down below if you want to watch that first and then start sewing. Next, I want to talk about stabilizing the shoulder seams. This is totally optional, but it's something that I am going to be doing in the video. The reason why I'm deciding to stabilize it is because the fabric is so lightweight and it is really drapey because of the trumpet hem. It's kind of weighty toward the bottom, and I really don't want it to kind of stretch out over time. And so to kind of help prevent some of that, I just added some stability to the shoulders. You can do this using stay tape, twill tape, clear elastic if you have it. I'm actually using hem tape on mine because that's really all I had on hand. That was a lightweight. My twill tape is a little bit more heavier, and I didn't want to add bulk to my shoulder seams, so I'm using hem tape on mine, and I think it works great. It's not bulky at all on the shoulder seam, and it does add a little bit of support to the shoulders. Again, totally optional. You do not need to do that. If you do choose to do it, apply it to your front seam allowance, not the back. Typically you would apply it to the back, or at least I do, but for this garment you need to apply it to your front shoulder seam because we're going to be pressing the shoulder seam forward and doing a top stitch. But you'll see all that in the video. I just wanted to go ahead and mention it. That way you know what's happening and that it is an optional step. The last thing that I want to mention before we start sewing are the sleeves. I found the sleeve to be a little bit big here around my hand. Since it has a thumb opening, some of the sleeve does come down toward the hand. And if I make this dress again, that's something that I would definitely take in just a little bit. I don't want it to be tight, but I do want it to, not be so loose the way it's kind of falling back and stuff. So I just wanted to mention that as well, just in case you want to kind of base your sleeve seam together first to test it out, see if you're comfortable with it. If you want to take it in, that would be the time to do it. So I think that I have went through all of my little notes that I made while I was sewing this dress. So go ahead and cut out your pattern, cut out your fabric, transfer all of your markings, and let's start sewing. Again, we're going to be sewing along to Vogue 2064. I'm going to be following along with View A in this video. These are some scraps, but this is the fabric that I am using. This is a rayon jersey fabric, 4-way knit stretch. So this is what I'll be using to make this dress. Let's go ahead and get started. To begin sewing, the first thing that we're going to do is, starting with pattern piece number 1, we are going to pin and stitch down the center front seam. So as you can see here, I've gone ahead and pinned down my center front seam, and we're going to go ahead and stitch it in place now using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. You can, if you prefer to use your serger, because this is knit fabric, you can stitch this whole thing with your serger if that's what you would like to do. But I like to stitch first and then serge. So I'm going to be stitching my seam, again 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then I'm going to finish it off with my serger. Let's go ahead and stitch the center front seam now. Once we have our center front seam sewn on pattern piece number 1, I am going to open this up, and I want to press my seam going toward the right. So let's go ahead and press it going toward the right now. Now that we have pressed our seam going toward the right, now we can do some top stitching. On the right side of the fabric, along the right side, we want to do some top stitching. We're going to be top stitching 1/4 inch away from this center seam. So let's go ahead and do some top stitching now. And again, 1/4 inch away from the seam, come over and do some top stitching. Now that we have the top stitching done along the front and you have given it a press, let's move on to the next step. Next, we're going to take pattern piece number 2, and with right sides facing, we are going to pin them along the sides, pin and stitch them in place. So go ahead and match up your notches, pin there first, you should have transferred a small circle along the bottom of pattern piece number 2. It matches up with pattern piece number 1. So go ahead and match those up and pin in place. And just continue pinning the side front to the front. All right, once you have your side front, again, pattern piece number 2, once you have that pinned on to pattern piece number 1, we can go ahead and stitch using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then we're going to finish off our seams and press them going toward the front. Now that we have pattern piece number 2 sewn on, you can see here I went ahead and finished off my seams with my serger, and now I'm going to press it going toward the front. After we have it pressed, we're going to do that same top stitch catching in this edge along the front here, 1/4 inch away from the seam. I'm going to go ahead and press it in place first. Let's go ahead and do our top stitching now. Now that we have done the top stitching here along the side, front, and the front, now let's go ahead and grab pattern piece number 3. Okay, with pattern piece number 3, you should have transferred a circle along the top that matches up to our circle here. So make sure that we pin that in place. And you want to bring this around as well. Make sure that you match up your 2 notches and pin in place. Okay, you want to go ahead and pin the other pattern piece number 3 onto the other side the same way. So go ahead and pin it in place like I've done here. We're going to stitch using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. You want to do the same thing again to the other side. All right, once you have pattern piece number 3 sewn on, you want to go ahead and press your seams going toward the front. So go ahead and give those a press. As you can see here, I finished off my seam with my serger. Go ahead and press them toward the front. And then once you have them pressed, we're going to do the same top stitching that we've done on the other stitches. So go ahead and press it toward the front first, and then go back and do your top stitch 1/4 inch away from this seam. Now that we have pattern piece number 3, the skirt side front sewn on, we have pressed the seam, we've done our top stitching. Now we can go ahead and put the front to the side and start to work on the back. To construct the back, we're going to do the same exact steps that we did to the front. The only difference is we are not stitching down the center back seam like we did on the front. We stitched our center front seam together, but we have to install a zipper back here on the center back seam, so we are not going to stitch this seam just yet. What you do want to do is pin and sew pattern piece number 5. That is the side back. Sew that on, press it toward the back and do the top stitching. And then you also want to sew the side skirt back, pattern piece number 6, the same way that we did to the front. Sew that on, press it toward the back, and do the same top stitching that we did on the front. So again, we're doing the same exact steps that we did to the front. The only difference is we are not sewing down the center back seam because we have to install a zipper. Let's do that now. All right, I have my backs constructed. So the center here is pattern piece number 4. I stitched on pattern piece number 5, as well as pattern piece number 6. The next step for us to do is with right sides facing, you want to pin your front and back together. We're going to match up the notches as well as our seams here. I do want to stabilize my shoulder seam. If you have stay tape, you can apply that to the back shoulder seam if you like. I'm going to see if I have some clear elastic on hand. If not, I will just use some stay tape. Again, I just want to kind of reinforce the shoulder seam. I do feel like over time it could possibly stretch out, but if I can help prevent that a little bit, I do want to go ahead and apply that. So let's go ahead and get some stay tape if you have it. If not, it's totally optional. You do not need it. This is an optional step and something that I'm doing to my garment. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then I will get the front and place them right sides together, and we can go ahead and stitch the shoulder seam. Okay, I have a little bit of hem tape here. This is what I'm going to be using. And I'm just going to place this right along the seam allowance. And I'm going to stitch in the middle of the hem tape along the seam allowance. So again, here is my shoulder seam here. I'm just going to measure this out. Again, this is totally optional. You do not need to do this. So I have that cut with right sides facing. I'm going to go ahead and grab my fronts. I'm going to match these up and pin them in place. And along the back seam allowance, this is where I'm just going to place my hem tape. Again, if you have a clear elastic, that would be fantastic for this. I have it all pinned, and this is what it looks like. I will adjust it once I get to the sewing machine. I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. Let's go ahead and stitch our shoulder seams in place now. Okay, now that we have the shoulder seam sewn, this is what mine looks like here. I pressed my seam going toward the back to cover up my hem tape, but I just looked at the instructions. You're actually supposed to press toward the front so that we can do a top stitch. If you did not bother with stabilizing your seam at all, just press your seam going toward the front and then do your top stitch the way we've been doing it for the other seams on this dress. I'm going to go ahead and do my top stitch now, but again, mine will be going toward the back because of the way I applied this stabilizer here. So go ahead and do your top stitching with your seam going toward the front. Let's go ahead and do that now. Now let's go ahead and start to work on the collar. For our collar, pattern piece number 7, you should have cut one out on the fold. And what we're going to do is below the fold line here, so you should have transferred your fold line, we are going to do some gathering stitches between this large dot and this small dot. So if you did not transfer these markings, please make sure that you transfer those. And again, between your large circle and your small circle here, we're going to do 2 rows of gathering stitches on both sides. So open it up. And again, do your rows of gathering stitches, 2 rows here and 2 rows here below the fold line between this large circle and this small circle, this circle here. Let's go ahead and do those 2 rows of gathering stitches. If you don't know how to gather, you want to lengthen out your machine stitch to the longest length stitch. On my machine, it goes up to a 5, but yours may be different. So if you're not quite sure, definitely check out your machine manual. And we're just going to do 2 rows right here within the seam allowance on both sides. Let's do that now. Now that we have our rows of gathering stitches, you can see I have mine here. We are going to use this shorter end of the collar. Mine wants to roll up. But we're going to use this shorter end of the collar as a guide. So we need to pull up our thread so that it's even with this side. I'm just going to fold it in half right here along this fold line. And I'm just going to start pulling up along my thread so that it matches the other side. Okay, now that we have pulled up on our gathers here along the long edge so that it matches this side here, I just placed a pin here and did a figure 8 around the pin just to secure the thread so they don't come out. On the unnotched edge of the collar, this long portion here, you do want to fold in a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I went ahead and did a basting stitch and I just folded in and pressed along that basting stitch. I'll remove that later. I just did the basting stitch as a guide. You don't have to do that. It's totally optional. But go ahead and fold up again a 1/2 inch along the unnotched edge of the collar up here. And then we can go ahead and pin this portion to the neckline of the dress. All right, so with right sides facing, let's go ahead and match up our notches and pin this in place. Make sure that you match up your circles as well and just continue pinning. Now that we have the collar pinned on, let's go ahead and stitch in a 5/8 inch seam allowance. If you are enjoying this video, please share, subscribe, and turn on your notifications for more sewing videos. Okay, I have my collar stitched on. You want to press your seam going up toward the collar. You don't have to finish off your seam allowance for this collar stitch because we are going to be folding that pressed edge over and then stitching it closed. So this seam will be inside of the collar, but I'm just obsessed with using my serger. But again, you don't have to do that. Go ahead and press your seam going up toward the collar, and then we can move on to the next step, which would be installing the zipper. Now that we have our collar attached, again, you want to go ahead and press your seam going up toward the collar. As you can see here, I did go ahead and finish off the seam allowance along the back center seam. I did that because once we install the zipper, I want my seam to be finished. I also installed about a 3/4 of an inch wide strip of fusible interfacing here. I just wanted to provide a little stability for the zipper. This is totally optional, but it's something that I like to do whenever I'm installing a zipper because it's a high stress area. We're going to be unzipping and zipping the dress multiple times. So it's best to just try to reinforce that a little bit. And so again, I just added a little bit of fusible interfacing right here where I will be installing the zipper. So now let's go ahead and get the zipper installed. The first thing that you want to do is go ahead and open up your zipper and press any folds out of it that it may have from the packaging. Just press along the zipper tape, not on the zipper teeth. The second thing that you want to do is go ahead and lay it along your seam line. So you want the zipper coils here to be right on your 5/8 inch seam line. You want this zipper tape to be inside the seam allowance, and you want the zipper stop of it to be 1/8 inch from that large dot. So right at that large dot on our collar, you want to just bring down and have that zipper stop right there, 1/8 inch below that large circle. For the end of the zipper, you want the zipper end to be right at that notch that we transferred. Again, my zipper is a little bit shorter because I only had a 22-inch zipper, not a 30-inch zipper. But if yours is as long as the pattern requires, yours should be reaching down here at the notch. If it's going past the notch, you can always shorten the zipper after we have it installed. So this is the right back side of my dress. I have it right sides facing up. This is my zipper here. I have it face down. And I have this side of the zipper tape. I have this just basted on in place just to kind of hold it in place till I get to the machine. But again, you want your zipper tape right here in the seam allowance. You want your zipper coils to be along your 5/8 inch seam line. And you want the top of the zipper stop to be 1/8 inch below the large circle. You want the zipper end to be right at that notch. Go ahead and baste your zipper in place like I've done here if you like. If not, you can go ahead and place pins in your zipper and then we can stitch it in place. I'm going to be stitching my zipper using an invisible zipper foot, but you can use a regular zipper foot to install an invisible zipper as well. Let's go ahead and stitch this side in place. Now that we have one side of the zipper sewn and installed, if you did do a basting stitch, you can go ahead and remove that. And now I'm just going to zip up the zipper here. Let's go ahead and pin on the other side of the zipper. One thing that I like to do is you have a seam right here at the collar. You definitely want to make sure that we match up that seam. So I'm just going to, I like to place a mark there to give me a little guide as well. So I know I need to make sure that stays there. I'm just going to match that up and pin that. And now I can go ahead and unzip the zipper and just pin the remaining of the zipper in place, or you can just baste it in place, whatever works best for you. Just make sure that you mark where that collar is. Okay, I've gone ahead and basted my zipper in place, so now I'm going to go to the sewing machine and I'm just going to stitch it down now. Again, make sure that you have your marking right along that seam. I'm going to put another pin, put my pin back here, just to make sure it stays there while I'm stitching. Let's go ahead and stitch the remaining of the zipper tape in place now. Okay, now that I have both sides of the zipper stitched in place, I'm going to go ahead and close it up and see what the zipper looks like on the right side here. That's what it looks like right here where the collar meets it, so I'm really happy with that seam. Okay, everything looks really good. I'm just going to add a little bit of steam here, and then we can close up the remaining of our seam. If you have a zipper that's going past our notch here, you can just create a new stop on your zipper. So at the end, you can just get a needle and thread and just go over where you want to create the new stop at, and then an inch below that you can go ahead and trim off the excess. Make sure that you create a new zipper stop first though, and again you just want to go over the coils, all the way around over the coils, or you can also drop your feed dogs on your sewing machine and just do a zigzag stitch to create a new zipper stop as well. But create a new stop before you trim, and you want to trim about an inch below wherever you created that new stop to shorten the zipper. Now I'm just going to pin the remaining of my seam together along the center back seam and then prepare to stitch it in place to close up this seam. So with right side spacing, I'm just going to pin the remaining of this seam. To close up the remaining of our seam, right here where we left off, I'm going to start stitching above it about 1/4 inch and to the left of the stitch. I'm going to start stitching and continue all the way down. So right here where I left off at, I'm not going to try to meet it because the zipper is there now, so it's going to be hard to stitch directly on that. So I'm just going to go up about 1/4 inch from where I stopped at and over to the left. Then I will begin stitching all the way down to the hem. So let's stitch the remaining of this opening closed. Once you have the remaining of your center seam sewn, you want to go ahead and give that a press. I've pressed mine open here, and now we can go ahead and finish up the collar. For our collar, we're going to open out the back like so. So yours should be, you should see all of your zipper tape here. And I'm going to fold this edge here of the zipper tape out of the way. So I'm folding that toward the seam allowance so I can trim that off later. And I'm going to fold the top portion of the collar over like so. And that portion that we folded up earlier, you want to keep that folded up. And now we are just going to pin this in place. So again, make sure that you keep that folded edge of the zipper tape folded over it out of the way. I'm going to start using some clips just to hold that there at the top. And I'm just pinning right along the zipper tape here. So I just folded the collar onto itself. And down here, again, this portion that we folded up earlier, you just want to have that right at our seam for the collar and just pin that in place. I'm going to fold over the collar on the other side the same exact way, and then you just want to stitch this in a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So let's go ahead and stitch this in place now. Once you have sewn your collars like so, I do recommend flipping everything out before you trim anything just to test it, see how everything looks. Again, before you trim off the corner, I recommend doing that. I already did mine and I'm happy with how it meets up at the top. So go ahead and just grab your scissors, and I'm just going to trim off right at this corner to reduce the bulk. So again, I just trimmed right along this corner to reduce some of the bulk. Now I'm just going to flip everything right side out like so. And now we can go ahead and close up our collar. So making sure that we have the seam still facing up toward the collar, you want to take this pressed edge that we pressed at an earlier step, and we're just going to bring it right past that seam, and we are going to do a stitch in the ditch to secure the collar and close up the opening. So to do a stitch in the ditch, you want to grab your pins. I'm going to be placing my pins along the right side. So on the outside of the dress, I'm going to place my pins in right here. And I am placing my pin right into this seam, making sure that I catch in the folded pressed edge here along the inside of the collar. So this pressed edge, make sure that it's going right past the seam. And then on the right side, you just want to put your pin right into the seam, making sure that you catch the pressed edge along the inside. Now that you have it pinned, let's go ahead and stitch right in the ditch, right along the seam, making sure that we catch in the pressed edge on the inside. Let's do that now. Okay, now that we have done our stitch in the ditch here and secured the collar in place, this is what mine looks like along the outside. This is what this looks like along the back here. Obviously, if you have a matching zipper, yours will match. But this is the zipper that I went with for this tutorial. So that's what mine look like here along the back of the dress. Now let's go ahead and put right sides together and we can sew our side seams. Match up your notches, match up all of your seams, and let's go ahead and pin and stitch them in place. Okay, once you have your side seams pinned, we can go ahead and stitch in a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then you can finish off your seam with your serger. Now that we have our side seams sewn, I went ahead and finished off my seams with my serger, and then I just pressed my seam going toward the back. Next, we're going to start to work on our sleeves. So let's go ahead and put this to the side, and we can go ahead and start working on installing the sleeves. To get started working on the sleeve, you want to grab pattern piece number 8. As you can see here, I went ahead and finished off my seams with my serger here. Next, you want to go ahead and put your sleeve right sides facing like so. So just fold your sleeve right sides facing. We're going to go ahead and pin down the sleeve. And again, you should have transferred some circles toward the bottom. Those are for our thumb hole. So again, if you did not transfer those, go ahead and transfer them. We're going to pin down and make sure that you pin and don't close up that opening. I'm going to start pinning now. Once you have your sleeve pinned, we can go ahead and stitch in a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Remember, down here at our dots, you want to stitch down, stop stitching here, back stitch, leave this open for the thumb hole, start back stitching here, back stitch all the way to the end. Let's go ahead and stitch our sleeve seam now. Now that we have our sleeve seam sewn, again, you wanted to make sure that you left an opening here for our thumb. And so now what you want to do is go ahead and press your seam, and right here where the thumb hole is, we're going to fold in a 1/4 of an inch of the seam allowance right beside that. And what we're going to do is, after we have it pressed, we're just going to do a 1/4 of an inch stitch, stitching like a rectangle around it. Let's go ahead and press it and stitch it now. All right, now that you have pressed around your opening like I've done here, again, now we can go to the sewing machine about a 1/4 of an inch up from the opening and a 1/4 of an inch from the bottom. We're just going to start stitching across, stitch right along this folded pressed edge, across at the bottom and back up to the top to create a nice rectangle stitch around the thumb opening. Once you have the thumb opening complete, this is what mine look like here. Next, you want to go ahead and press up your hem allowance. The hem allowance for the sleeve is 1 inch. As you can see here, I finished off the raw edge with my serger, and I also did a 1 inch basting stitch here. That's just as a guide, so it just makes it easier for me to press it up. Totally optional. You do not need to do a basting stitch there. Like I said, I just like to do it. Just makes it easier for me to press up the hem allowance right along that basting stitch, and then I can remove that stitch later. But go ahead and press up the hem allowance. Again, the hem allowance is 1 inch. On the raw edge, like I said, I finished mine off with my serger, but if you like, you can fold in 1/4 inch. Give that a press, and then you can stitch close to this inner folded edge here to secure your hem in place. Let's go ahead and stitch our hem now. Now that I have my sleeve hemmed, this is what it looks like on the inside. So now let's go ahead and install it into the top. With the right sides facing, you want to first make sure that you match up your notches. The double notches go toward the back, the single notch goes toward the front. I'm going to match up my side seam and my shoulder seam first, and then I will match up the notches. You should have transferred some circles. You want to match those up. The one along the top goes to the shoulder, so make sure that you match it there, and then continue matching up your circles and notches and pin your sleeve in place. Now that you have it pinned, we can go ahead and stitch in a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then you can stitch again 1/8 of an inch away from that first seam within the seam allowance. For me, I'm going to stitch in a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then I'm just going to use my serger as like that second stitch, and that will stitch as well as finish off the raw edge. So let's go ahead and stitch our seam in place now. Now that we have our sleeve installed, make sure that you do the same thing to the other sleeve and get both of your sleeves sewn on. Next, we're going to go ahead and start working on our hem. For our hem, we are going to do a narrow hem. So first, what you want to do is fold up 5/8 of an inch and give that a press. Once you have that press, you can open it out, fold in the raw edge to that crease, and then fold it over again to create your narrow hem. You may need to do a 1/4 inch basting stitch that will allow you to ease in any fullness that you may have while you're stitching your hem in place. My press was able to lay everything down nicely, so I don't think I'll have any problems easing in the fabric. But again, if you feel like you have a lot of excess fabric, you can put a basting stitch that will allow you to pull that up to ease in the fullness so that you'll be able to get a nice flat hem. But go ahead and press your hem up in place. Again, make sure that you fold in the 1/4 inch of that raw edge, and we can stitch close to this folded pressed edge. Let's go ahead and finish our hem, and then we'll have one more step to this dress. Okay, once you have your hem complete, it should look something like this along the bottom of the dress. So this is how my hem looks here along the inside. That's what it looks like along the outside. Go ahead and give your hem a nice final press. The last thing for us to do is to place some tacks here along the collar so that it keeps that kind of gathered effect here along the front of the collar. There were some circles on our collar piece. At each of those circles, we are going to place a little tack. You can do the tack by hand. The instructions recommend doing it by hand through all layers, or if you prefer, you can do it by machine through all layers. You just want to make sure that at your markings, and this is one of my markings here, at every marking that you transferred, you want to place a little tack there through all layers so that it keeps that ruching effect along the front of the collar. Let's go ahead and place some tacks in now. The gathering effect should only be on the front of it. The back of it needs to stay smooth. So let's go ahead and place some hand tacks on the collar now. Okay, after you have added your tacks, your collar should look similar to this. You can see I have 3 over here and 3 on this side as well. Once you have your tacks installed on the collar, you can give your dress one final press and you are all done with Vogue 2064 View A. Well, that is all for the tutorial, and I really do hope that it was helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them down for me below. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn on your notifications, and I will see you all in the next video. Blessings, everyone. Bye.